This one is for your inner ninja. This is the Jake Hoback Radford, and this is a version of the Radford that was actually made in America. Now, I'm not going to get too far into the Hoback controversy. It's been litigated enough on YouTube, but the fact is, Jake Hoback got dragged pretty hard by the community a few years ago for, let's say, omitting the country of origin, or maybe not being forthcoming enough with country of origin on some of his knives. But he remains one of the OG makers, American makers, and he has been making very highly regarded custom knives in America for a very long time. And this was his debut of the Radford model, which is effectively a smaller version of his most famous model, his Hoback. The Radford, the Hoback, is a giant beast, 190,000 blade stock, 4-inch blade. The thing is just freaking huge. I used to have a Hoback. It was very cool and very, very useless. The Hoback Radford, and this was about $400, $450 when it came out, is 3¼ inches on the blade, 150 thousandths on the blade stock. This particular version, actually it doesn't show it here. I think it's actually inside the inside here. Yeah, you can see right there, it's S90V. You can see it that way. 2020 this thing was made, which these made in America Radfords were all made in 2020. And this thing is probably somewhere in the realm of 3.8 to 4 ounce. I couldn't find an exact weight for this one or a product listing, and I'm not going to drag out my scale. But based on other titanium Radfords, this is about 3.8 ounces. Now, one thing to be clear about, there are plenty, in fact, there's a lot more Chinese-made Radfords out there. This is a Radford made by We Knives. I believe most of the Radfords are made by We Knives. These knives, and I will do a comparison between the two when I do a full review on this one. These are the same knife. They're the same format. They feel very, very different. I won't go into the details now, but just know most of your Radfords out there, if you see one that looks more like this, that has that sort of kink in the blade grinder, frankly, that looks anything other than like this one, it's almost certainly made in China. But these titanium versions, and this is all titanium lock side, titanium show side, with some internal milling that I don't think my lighting is going to pick up there. You can see it in the shadows. These versions were made in the US by Jake Hoback in his shop. A couple quick size comparisons, because if you've been in knife for a long time, you will know the Hoback well, and you probably were aware that the Radford came out. If you're newer, you might not be quite as familiar with Jake Hoback stuff. So you can see right in the middle, 3¼ inches, so a little bit longer than your Neutron, a little bit smaller than your Atom, about the same length, and frankly similar in overall size, albeit very different in overall presentation compared to your Bug Out. Let's take your 940 here. So similar in size to your 940, and frankly similar in overall shape to your 940. And then let's just get our Para 3 and PM2 out here. Sits nicely between the two of them. So the Radford, and this was the debut model of the Radford, so the first Radfords came out looking just like this. A little bit of personal background. The first high-end knife I ever bought was that Jake Hoback. So he was the guy that got me into high-end knives. I do have a lot of sort of nostalgia around Jake Hoback's knives. But the Radford here was an attempt to make the Hoback a more useful knife. And in that sense, it is, or at least more pocket-friendly knife. It is still very much a Hoback. It's still got this upswept Tonto blade, so it is a Tonto grind. It's flat here, but there's a bit of a shift there. At least he calls it a Tonto, but it is upswept in the sense that this tip is actually above the top of the scale, with this neutral sort of straight but coming together subtly toward the butt handle, with a little finger groove here, front sort of rounding, and then this sort of slanted tail. This is the exact same shape that Quabacks have had, and the whole thing is just shrunk down for the Radford. It's made thinner, it's made lighter, it's made smaller. One of the other cool things that I'll just get right to with the Radford and the Quaback is look how well that blade just falls into, and you can actually see there is a bit of a curve on the bottom here. This one's straight, there's a bit of curve on the bottom. Look how well that blade fits into that handle. Look at how nicely that blade sits within that handle. That's always very cool to me when you get a blade that just fits into the handle, so the whole thing in your pocket. I mean, you got that tiny little flipper tab. This thing is no bigger than the handle in your pocket in terms of the space it takes up. The other, you got this this milling pattern here on your handle. There's a bronze andization. It's actually got a little bit of purple in it that's not coming through on the camera. It's a very cool andization job. Acid wash S90V blade. Milling pattern here has this sort of diamond pattern to it, which is cool. Adds a little bit of traction. Stone wash otherwise on your handle here. Last little gimmick it has is right here. You can't see it. If you look really closely, you can see your detent ball there. This has Hoback's rolling detent. So what's the Hoback rolling detent? Oh, by the way, titanium backspace for here. The Hoback rolling detent, so your typical knife with a detent, like your Shirogorov Neon here, that detent ball, I pick a terrible example because it's hard to see the detent ball in a Shiro. But typically your detent is stationary, so there's a little thing sticking up and your blade rides over that detent. And that detent is just basically a ball that it's fixed in place. So the ball does not roll with the blade. The ball just drags on the blade as you open and close. You use, part of what makes a detent good or bad is getting it so that the amount of friction that ball places on the blade as it grinds past, as it drags past, making it so that it's not too much, not too little, so that the detent is crisp while the action still, moves quickly. So when you've got something like this, Shirogorov, they get that tension just right so that it's smooth, but still has a nice, crisp detent break. Hoback, his solution to that problem was to make it so that the detent ball can actually roll by itself. So when you're opening and closing this knife and you feel it, it feels like you're rolling across a ball. That ball, that detent ball, is spinning and rolling in its pivot, and it feels like the knife is rolling on a bearing. This feels even more bearingsy of an action than even most knives on bearings. There's a little bit more continuous friction across the whole thing. It's not free, it's not floppy, it's controlled the whole way, but you still get that nice crisp detent break. So it gives a different sensation. I'm not even going to say whether it's better or worse, it's just different. It is Hoback's thing. I don't know whether it's technically patented. It might be patented. What I do know is that I don't think very many, maybe none other than Hoback use it. Snex might have used it on something, but I wouldn't be surprised if he even talked with Hoback before doing that. It's well known that rolling detent, he even calls it the Hoback rolling detent. So it is very much his thing, whether he has a formal patent on it or not, it's Hoback's thing. So there's a lot of interesting little things going on in this knife. Let's just get into the details here. So blade, again, upswept Tonto. 155,000 of the blade stock. So even though this is slimmed down from the Quaback was super thick, this is still pretty thick. And this blade, it's interesting. So the Quaback, it gets sold as kind of like a martial artsy kind of knife. Because when you got this upswept Tonto, it's really good for like poking people. It's really good for, when you got to do your big slashes and all that sort of stuff. All your mole ninja kind of stuff. This kind of Persian style upswept tip. I mean, nothing about the bottom of this blade is Persian. But that kind of upswept tip is really good for fighting knife kind of things. You see fighting knives go one of two ways. Either like the Yojimbo where they're a Wharncliffe, which is meant for your kind of like reverse slashing sort of thing. Or this, which is meant for just being really, really good at stabbing into people. Nice pronounced tip, super, super stabby. The problem, especially with an upswept blade like this, where the whole bottom of the blade is angling away from the handle, and then your tip here goes up and away from the handle, and your tip is super, super high. This is not a great blade shape for EDC. It's just not. Anything where you want to get down onto a material, you got to try to either, you got to really try to catch this belly here and sort of scrape it through or drag it through. This tip is just really hard to get to for any tasks. And frankly, even up near this tip, with this relatively thick blade stock, a pretty shallow grind, as in there's just not that much space to drop, and the whole thing is a flat grind. Not only is it just kind of awkward to use a blade where the edge goes away from you so much for a lot of EDC tasks, but this thing is just not that sharp behind the edge. It's just not. It's just the geometry. There's no way with this little space to drop. And you can feel it. This thing just feels fat behind the edge. It's not quite like Hinderer levels of fat behind the edge, because Hoback does grind his blades pretty well. He is pretty aggressive with his flat grinds, but it is still flat ground with thick stock, and it just doesn't have that much space to drop. This thing is thick behind the edge. It is an awkward blade shape. It is, I guess, easy to get this around some things, but the problem is, if you're used to, again, I'll just keep bringing out the Shiro here. If you look at how much lower the edge is on the Shiro compared to the Hoback here, if you're used to using knives like this with your typical drop point shapes, let alone Wharncliffe, sheepfoot, things like that, you're used to the edge being like down below your hand in general. You're used to having to go like, how much you got to tilt your wrist, how much you got to move your hand to cut into stuff to start that cut. If you're used to using knives, there's just an intuition you have about where that edge should be. The edge on the Radford is always just a little bit behind where you think it should be. It's always a little bit further away. You start to cut, and you still got to push a little bit more than you always think you have to get that edge into stuff. You combine that with the fact that the edge is not actually that sharp, and then you got to push a little bit harder to actually bite into stuff, and it's just not a great cutting experience for typical EDC stuff. For stuff around the house, not having an accessible tip anywhere that you've got to basically drag with this kink in the belly, it's just less precise. This big flat, you can push it through stuff. It will go through your cardboard, things like that, but it's not the fact that this is all flat and you've only got this little bit of belly here. It just feels less comfortable on those longer slicing cuts. It's harder to get the edge to where you want to. It's just not a natural blade shape. It looks cool, and you're going to be really well equipped if you happen to get into a knife fight while you are doing your EDC things. Assuming you have any knowledge of how to use a folding knife in a knife fight. But I think, the general rule that, the only guarantee in a knife fight is that both people are probably going to the hospital, and the best way to deal with a knife fight is a pair of running shoes. All of that is probably more true than the solution being, okay, I should have a Radford in my pocket. But the fact is, it's just this is for cool points. This blade shape is for cool points. It's not actually that useful for doing stuff. This handle, like all of Hoback's handles, is surprisingly ergonomic and very nicely done. All titanium here, again, internal milling. He was one of the earlier guys that was doing these more thoughtful milling pockets on the inside of stuff. He's reasonably technical in his work, and has been a legitimate innovator in the space in various places. But very nice machining. Not necessarily complicated, but everything fits together super, super well. There is, that internal milling. Very nice flats, very crisp chamfers, nice even chamfer all the way around. And ergonomically, it looks like a stick, it looks like a neutral handle, but it is comfortable in the hand. The little bit of curve you get here, the fact that this does just kind of flare a bit toward the back, just the way this whole handle rolls into your palm, It's comfortable. This does provide a little bit of grip. It's a nice handle. It's not going to be super ergonomic as you start to push on it more. There's nothing in here locking your hand in except for this first finger groove. You can choke up here. You can use your, flipper tab here. Get a little bit of extra grip there. Move your middle finger into this groove. And this is comfortable too when you want to get closer to that blade. As you start to push this thing harder, the lack of ergonomic curves on the back half is going to make it so you've really got to grab this knife to keep it where it needs to be. It's not grabbing you back, whether you're here or here. So it's not an ergonomic dream, but it's more ergonomic than you might think looking at it. And it does look very, very cool. It's got that kind of just like steampunky kind of look to it in these particular finishes. It just looks mean. It just looks badass. The way this pivot sort of stands out, the relatively minimal hardware, looks almost as cool on the backside. Bent clip here, which some people think is a bit of a downside, but it works just fine. Actually, that's probably a machine clip. I shouldn't say bent. That's probably a machine clip because that's thicker than most bent clips. But it is really more for style than function, but it functions well enough. Again, the problem is when you got a blade that's this relatively thick and is a little awkward to use, the ergonomic deficits of the handle are going to come into play more often. You're going to more often wish that you had a little bit more to grab onto, a little bit more scalloping. But if you had that, it wouldn't be a Hoback variant. This is the style of the Hoback, and it looks and feels every bit the part. And the closer you look at this, you do see everything is done very nicely everywhere. Backspacer sits very cleanly in between the handles. And I do really love with this whole design that it does fold up very nicely into the pocket. Now at over 4 ounces for not just a 3 1/4 inch blade, so not just a relatively short knife, but what is a relatively small knife overall, this does feel very dense in the pocket. It does kind of want to swing around and make itself known, even though it is pretty physically small. It won't take up much of your pocket, but it does, you do feel it there. In terms of thickness, compare it to something like your Sebenza here, and it is a good bit thicker, but a lot of that thickness is just because your blade stock is a lot thicker than a lot of other knives in that 3 1/4 inch range. And then, because it is so small, this flipper tab here, no jimping, but it's designed by a guy who's been doing flipper tabs for a very, very long time, has been doing flipper actions for a very, very long time. It looks like there wouldn't be enough to grab onto, but there is, and it fires out very nicely, very reliably. Access to that lock bar is fine, not particularly good nor particularly bad. One little thing to note, it is a very late sort of break that it gets up onto the detent ramp here, or the detent ball. So when I unlock here, there's the sort of kick where the blade gets up onto that detent ball is all the way down here. So you can't really just like unlock it and then drop it. It'll get stuck there. So you've really got to coax it down past that, and then it'll kind of shake shut. I can make it a little looser if I want to. But it really is kind of a guided shut kind of bearings detent here. Which feels nice, but if you're used to those faster bearings actions that a lot of knives have today, it might feel a little sluggish to you. So all that to say, this is a form over function knife. The form is very, very cool. You've been looking at this knife for the whole review. This is a tiny little Hoback, and people have loved the Hoback since it was probably early 2000s. I don't want to say it went back into the 90s, but I mean, when we talk OGs, we're talking like one of the first American custom makers when people started making stuff with machines like this. We're talking, not like Terzawula far back, but we're talking Hoback's been doing knives for a very, very long time. People love the Hoback because the thing just looks badass. It looks mean, it looks cool. At the same time, it looks sleek. This kind of looks like if there was somebody in Warhammer 40k and they carried a knife. They would carry a Hoback, not a Radford, but it's a cool design. It's a very distinctive design. It's Hoback's signature design. And the Radford took the giant knife that is the Quebec. You know, that thing is 190,000 of the blade stock. Usually they're like 5-6 ounces, big fat fullers, huge and thick in the pocket. Took that huge knife and made it more palatable, more carryable. Just something that you could have on your person every day much more easily. The fact is, even though this is slimmed down, even though this is more carryable, there's still a lot of things inherent to the Quebec form factor that make it pretty unsuitable for everyday carry. This upswept blade shape, especially with the thick stock that you've got here, looks super duper cool, but is just not that useful for most of the stuff that you use knife tasks for every single day, unless you're getting into a knife fight every single day, in which case you've got bigger problems that you really should deal with. This handle looks super cool. It's great that whole blade folds into the handle. It's more ergonomic than you might expect, but it's still not that ergonomic. The reason that you would buy and carry a Radford is you think that this looks cool and you want to have a really nicely finished, really just well-made, especially American-made, just cool piece of kit on you all the time that happens to also be able to do some cutting tasks when the need really arises. And the thing is, will it cut stuff? Will it open that envelope for you? Will it break down that cardboard box for you? Sure. Is it going to do it as well as any more EDC focused knife, as any more function focused knife that you got? No. No, it's not. It's not going to feel as nice in the hand. It's not going to cut as efficiently. It's going to feel more awkward because of the blade shape and because of the way that this handle is set up relative to the blade. It's not going to be as nice to use. But if you're the kind of person that wants a Radford, that's all secondary. You want a Radford because it looks super cool. Now, what I will say is he's not making these. Actually, he might start making these American versions again, because Hoback is really sort of very publicly trying to get back into making more volume of stuff in America. He's kept his customs businesses going, but it's been very small batch. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing more American-made Radfords floating around. There were not many of these made, probably in the dozens to maybe like 100. I would say, if you are a Hoback fan and you do like the form factor, I'll talk about the Wii one more in the review for this. Now, the Wii version, and I'm pretty sure this one is Wii. I know he did some work with Best Tech, but I'm pretty sure the Radford was all made by Wii. The Wii version is actually sharper, but that's just because the blade is a little bit taller and just Wii puts a better grind on it out of the factory. But other than that, this Made in America version is superior in every way. It looks cooler, it feels cooler, it's just tighter, it's just better finished. The little design details that change between the two of them, this Made in America Radford is universally better. If you do really like Hoback's designs, and if you really like and have tried the Radford, it is worth trying to track down one of these older American-made ones. It is just a better knife in every way. At least I think so. It's more satisfying in all the ways that I sort of want in a knife like this, and especially all the aesthetic and sort of feel related things. This is just a better knife. But know that if this design doesn't sing to you, there's absolutely no reason for you to track down a Radford. There's no functional reason that this knife is superior to any knife that you already have in your collection. If you want this knife, get it because you think it's cool. Get it because it's a vibe that you particularly like. And if you do that, it'll do the job. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the American-made Jake Hoback Radford. Best way you can support this channel is leave some comments down below. Let me know your thoughts on the Radford. If you're going to let me know your thoughts on Jake Hoback, keep it to his knives. I mean, if you want to talk about, the crap that happened a few years ago, feel free. I may or may not engage. I'll engage with substantive comments. I'm not going to engage with belligerence. But yeah, if you like Jake Hoback's knives, if you don't like Jake Hoback's knives, let me know down in the comments. If you tried a Radford, let me know. If you had a Quayback or have a Quayback and want to know how the Radford compares, happy to opine on that. Anyway, those have been my thoughts on this particular knife. This has been Clark the Knife, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for your time.